Hi all, Anthony Wilson, your Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And today is day one of Drought Level 1. The new watering restrictions took effect today, and so we wanted to take some time to explain to you exactly what that means, what the new rules are, what you can do, what you can't do, and try to put it into some sort of context. And so we've got two really good sources of information here today with us to help explain that. We have Lance Overstreet. Lance is our Assistant Director of Water Utilities, and we also have Paulina Levy, and she is our Water Conservation Coordinator. So thank you guys for being with us. Lance, as I mentioned, Drought Level 1 restrictions were triggered by the fact that we have 24 months of available water supply. And I'd like you to explain exactly what that means, 24 months of available water supply.
Sure. What we actually do is our primary water source is, of course, Lake Ivy. And what we do is that is managed by the Colorado River Water Municipal District. And every quarter they publish what those lake levels are, or what they anticipate the time period that they're going to be able to provide water to us. And so what we do is we typically take that particular value in months, and then we actually forecast how that's going to look in terms of the remaining water that's going to be left in our other resources. So we take the Ivy, we basically project that forward, see how many months that's going to be. Then we look at the usage on Nasworthy and Twin Buttes and our other reservoirs in the area. And so we then forecast how many months of supply we have with no inflow before the surface water conditions are all gone.
And so that's a really important point that you just made, and I want to make sure that we stress this. 24 months is a worst case scenario that assumes no rainfall, no runoff into our lakes whatsoever.
Exactly.
In Ivy, people may not realize, but ours is not the only straw in that drink. The Ivy's down to about 14% of its capacity. And of that 14%, we only have about 16% because there are other communities that also draw water from Ivy.
And not only do we only have 16% of that, but we only have 16% of the available water that's there. When Ivy gets down to a certain level, there may still be water in the reservoir itself, but it's just no longer available to the pumps and to the system. And so that's one thing that people also have to realize is that lake level may have still water in it. It just may not be available for us. And we are actually experiencing something similar to that at Twin Buttes right now with our South Pool and our North Pool. The South Pool is no longer equalizing to the North Pool, and so the South Pool water is currently unavailable to us without us doing some kind of mechanical means, which we are looking into.
And so that means pumping water physically,
yes,
instead of just letting it flow down the equalization channel, pumping it from that South Pool to that North Pool.
Exactly.
Then it can be released into Lake Nasworthy and then downriver to our water treatment plant.
Exactly.
So obviously one of our water sources now is the Hickory Aquifer. How is the Hickory factored into our available water supply?
We are currently actually utilizing the Hickory Aquifer right now. We're doing somewhere about 1.5 million gallons to 2 million gallons a day. And so we are supplementing that right now. It is important to continue to run that system to make sure it's operable. We are not maximizing that right now, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. One of the reasons is evaporation. Any of the surface water conditions in the reservoirs are going to lose a substantial amount of water every year to evaporation. In fact, it's over 60 inches of elevation every year they will drop, and that's the average that comes from the Texas Water Development Board. During peak hot times, we've actually seen that exceed and up into 7 to 8 feet, up into the 80-inch range. In fact, last week when we were having the 108, 109 degree temperatures, we actually saw those lake levels dropping just like it was back in the 2011 when it was at the worst. And so if we start supplementing with the Hickory, then that water is going to sit there, continue to evaporate, continue to not be available to us. The other thing that we have as a bonus is that we can bank water in the Hickory. So if we are not running it at a maximum capacity, we can actually store in that reservoir underground and protect to have water that we can then pull from at a later date. And then there's also, too, the fact that the Hickory water, because of the treatment process, it is quite a bit more expensive to actually pull out for the city and the utility.
So what you're saying is we try to use that surface water while it is available to us before it evaporates, before Midland or Abilene are using portions of the water that would normally go to us, make that available, store the Hickory Aquifer for that worst case scenario where we may need to rely upon that as our sole water source.
Yes, and the other thing too is that right now we use about, on average, yearly 12 million gallons a day. We can only produce out of the Hickory 8 million gallons a day if everything is functioning properly, which means there's a 4 million gallon deficit per day. And so until you get into more of those more stringent drought conditions, we would actually be in a deficit situation for the city if we were only on the Hickory water.
And so, while we're talking about the Hickory, a lot of people have asked about the Ford Ranch, which sits atop the Hickory. And of course, a lot of people know that we purchased that last year in order to protect our water rights. Has any portion of that been put on the market in order to start recouping the cost of that purchase?
Yes, we have actually put a couple of portions of the Ford Ranch up for sale. There is the major portion of it has not been, and the reason it hasn't been is because we have a second phase of development to do at the Hickory well field to increase our productivity and our capabilities. And so the largest portion of the ranch is not, but we have two other edge, if you will, properties that have actually gone on the market and are for sale currently.
Very good. So Paulina, what is allowed under our drought level 1 restrictions?
Right, so as Lance mentioned, our average consumption is about 12 million gallons per day. But in the summer, we have seen peaks that go as high as 22 million gallons per day. Because of that, we institute watering restrictions on outdoor watering during our drought contingency. So in the moment, we're in drought level 1, so we have restricted watering to occur only once every 7 days if you are using sprinklers. If you are using drip irrigation or if you are using hand watering, you have exceptions. And I want to explain a little bit of why that's allowed. So if you are using drip irrigation or if you are hand watering, you are dropping larger water droplets into the ground. Those droplets will go deeper into the ground. They won't evaporate as quickly. You are watering directly. And so they're considered a form of a conservation measure. And we want to encourage that. So if you are hand watering, you can water more often than once a week, but you're still held to the prohibited hours. If you're using drip irrigation, you can water at any time. Now, the prohibited hours are put in place because between the hours of noon and 6 p.m., those are some of the hottest hours of the day. So you're going to see high levels of evaporation occurring. So your soil, your landscape, lawn, plants won't actually be absorbing all of the water that you are using. So we try to restrict people from watering between noon and 6 p.m.
And so once a week watering, no more than 1 inch per week, and not between the hours of noon and 6 p.m. Now, is that sufficient once a week watering in 1 inch in order to keep landscapes alive?
Yes, 1 inch, when we think about it, we think of just 1 inch, and it may not sound like a lot, but in water terms, it's actually more than enough water if it's happening once a week. It's actually the recommended amount for most lawns. And it's hard to visualize it. It's hard to know exactly what 1 inch is. And so we have resources on the website that help explain how to measure 1 inch of watering. The simplest way to do it if you're using a conventional sprinkler is to put out a tuna can or a cat food can out in your yard and measure how long it takes for you to fill up that can in that area. And that will tell you how long you need to run your sprinklers for you to water your yard 1 inch. If you're using other resources, I recommend going online again to our website, and we have detailed explanations on how to figure that out.
And of course, that URL is costatx.us/water. Now I'm going to pose a lot of questions to you guys that we've gotten via our Facebook page. And Lance, one of those is we've been asked why we're not just banning outside watering altogether now that we've moved into our drought contingency plan.
Sure. I think at this point we are in a serious condition because we're in drought, obviously. We haven't really reached a point to where we're critical yet. Like we said, a lot of our calculations are based upon the fact of no inflow. And historically, Ivy has never had a year that they had no inflow, but we have to kind of prepare for a worst scenario. And so although we are concerned and that we are moving to a drought level to try to help people conserve, we're still not at a point where we're at a critical point to where we are highly concerned about the future at this point. The other thing too is as many people know, there are a lot of trees in San Angelo. Those do require some water, and where a lawn can be reestablished fairly easily, so the trees takes years and lifetimes to reestablish, and so it helps to maintain some of the vegetation.
So we're in a serious situation, and we just want people to be very mindful of their water usage and just be as conservative as possible. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about one of the other portions of drought level 1, and that is some usage surcharges. Okay. Explain how that works, Lance.
Sure. The whole idea of the usage surcharge is it has been proven that when you have a surcharge in a drought condition, people do have a tendency to be more mindful of the water that they're using and conserve. And so San Angelo, along with other municipalities, have implemented this in a drought condition to where there is a surcharge that gets put on a bill for the amount of usage. Easiest terms is the average household uses about 5,000 gallons a day, and the surcharge would basically end up being about 75 cents per month, give or take a little bit, for a single household using 5,000 gallons. And so in the residential environment, it is kind of tiered as a multiplier. Those tiers are available on the website as well, and so that you can kind of see where you fall. If anyone ever had questions about those bills, they could absolutely contact the customer service department. They could explain those tiers and let you know how you fall or what your average usage was last month, so that you can kind of monitor what you're doing this month. And so there are tiers for residential, and then there's also a surcharge to the commercial as well.
And so those tiers, for most customers, it's going to be 5%, depending upon their usage. If they get above 15,000 gallons per month, it'll be 10%, and if they got above 39,000 gallons per month, it'd be 20%.
Sure.
But most people are going to fall in that 5% range.
Most residences, I say, would fall in the 5%. You have to be using a very high volume to get over that, 15,000 gallons per month.
And one of the things I want to make clear is that surcharge applies only to the fee related directly to their water usage, not to their entire bill that they get each month.
Yeah, that you won't see that on your base charges. It'll just be strictly on your usage.
And a lot of people have asked how water is billed, because we don't do it for every gallon that you use or every 100 gallons that we use.
Right. We actually bill in 1,000 gallons of usage. So if you use 990 gallons, you won't get billed for the 990 until you have reached that 1,000th gallon, and then you get billed. And so a lot of times people who are very low usage customers, they may actually get a month where they don't get charged for their water because it was less than the 1,000 gallons, and then the next month they would actually get charged for the 1,000, which would be accumulation of it. And so until that meter has actually accumulated to a 1,000 gallon increment, then you don't get charged on that month.
And so I also want to be clear, if you use less than 3,000 gallons per month, there is no surcharge whatsoever. So those very low volume users won't face any charge whatsoever. So we mentioned about the high volume users paying more in surcharges. Do they pay more on their base rate for their usage?
So that really depends. The base fee is dependent upon your meter size. So if, for example, you have a sprinkler meter in your residence, that's probably going to be larger than your average 5/8 meter. So it's a case-by-case basis, but I'm inclined to say that if you have a 5/8 meter, your base rate will remain the same, but if you're using more than, like you said, 15,000 gallons a month, then you'll see those extra surcharges and you'll see an increased bill slightly.
And so aside from the rate that you pay just for having a water meter, you also pay for your usage, but those rates are tiered as well. So the more water that you use, the more you pay for your water, and then the surcharges sort of track along with that.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, one of the questions that we've been asked a lot is, well, why don't you just charge the high volume users who've gotten us into this situation? I think that's a little bit of a fallacy. Are we in a drought situation and are our lakes depleted because of high volume usage?
No, not really. We're in a condition because of the environment. We have had several months of not enough rain, high temperatures, and that's what puts our drought conditions in place. It's not so much the high users. And the reality of it is that the majority of the customers that pull water from San Angelo are residential. And so it's not necessarily the volume users that we see as the biggest draw in the system. It is the residential users is really our biggest portion of that.
Yeah, and Paulina, you probably know this figure off the top of your head, but I want to say it's somewhere like around 80% of the water used in San Angelo is by residential users?
Yes, it's just under 75% of our usage is coming from residents. And, you know, that saying every drop counts, I think it really resonates here. It shows that every drop counts in the residents, and when you count how many residents San Angelo has, it really adds up. So even though individually you're using, you're conserving, it adds up when you look at your neighbor and everyone in your neighborhood.
So this is a point that I've tried to make on our Facebook page. People have asked why we don't just charge the high volume users more, and it's because we're not in this situation because of those high volume users. We're in the situation, like Lance said, because of the environment, because we're in a drought situation. And so that's a community issue. And as a result of that, we all have a little bit of a burden to shoulder in order to, you know, get us through this, this very difficult time with our water supply. Paulina, what happens to the surcharge if we get some torrential rains tomorrow and our water supply again eclipses 24 months? What happens to the surcharge?
Right, so on the first of every month, we calculate our month's water supply. So currently we are at 24 months water supply, as we explained earlier, in the worst case scenario. So on the first, we are going to recalculate how much water we have. And if we do reach that 25 months threshold, then we go back to how things were last month. So watering will be allowed twice per week. However, if we remain between 24 months and 18 months, we'll remain in drought level 1.
Okay, so if we were to suddenly get a big storm and our lakes fill up, the surcharge goes away?
Yes.
And there's no change at all to the base, or when I say the base rates, I mean the rates that you typically pay for your water usage.
Right, so like you said, base fee, sewer, trash, that isn't changing at all this month. It's only your usage fee, which is a portion of your bill.
And one of the things that Lance mentioned earlier that I want to reiterate is if you have any questions or concerns about your bill whatsoever, please contact our water customer service office. They have a web page on our website at cosatx.us. Just look for the tab for the water customer service office, or you can call them. The number is really easy to remember. It's 657-4323. So if you have questions about your bill, please call those. Paulina, if someone sees a watering violation, what should they do?
Right, so this is very important for us to hold each other accountable. And so if you see a watering violation, for example, water running off more than 150 feet down curb, pavement, driveway, you name it. If it's concrete, it doesn't grow, it shouldn't be watered. You can visit the website, cosatx.us/water, and report a watering violation, or you can also call 657-4409.
And so, Brian, if you will, if you'll put the screen back up that shows what the watering restrictions are, because I think it's important that people see that and know exactly what the restrictions are. So if you see someone watering more than once a week, or if you suspect that they're watering for such a long period of time that it's more than 1 inch, or if they're watering between the hours of noon and 6 p.m., please call our code compliance office, because they're the folks who police that. And like Paulina said, we all need to hold one another accountable as far as that goes. Paulina, is everyone subject to these restrictions?
Yes, like you said, this is a community effort. This isn't just the residents who are going to have watering restrictions. Everyone is restricted to outdoor watering, including our parks department. So they have already adjusted their sprinklers. Most of our parks are drip irrigation where they can be. We are constantly installing rain barrels so that we are reusing water instead of pulling water and buying it. So it's really everyone in town is going to be abiding by these, I hope.
And so here's a little plug for tomorrow. If you'll tune into our Facebook page tomorrow at 11 a.m., we're going to have Roger Havlock. He is the parks senior manager, and he's going to be talking about how the parks respond whenever there are drought restrictions in place, because they've already done some things that are well beyond drought level 1 restrictions. And so it's important that the community knows that the city's biggest water user, which is our Parks Department, is all in when it comes to conserving water. So again, that will be at 11 o'clock tomorrow. So Paulina, let me ask you about a couple of businesses in particular that we've been asked about on Facebook when it comes to restrictions. So one of those is car washes. What are the restrictions on car washes?
Right. Before I get to car washes, I just want to clarify a little bit. You said that parks are the city's biggest city users. Not overall, not when you're including every business, just the city.
Yeah,
so
when I say the city, I want to say it's the City of San Angelo
Ourselves.
organization, our local
Yes.
government.
Yes.
Yeah, but not the community as a whole.
Exactly.
Good point.
So I just wanted to clarify that so we didn't scare anyone. So car washes, most of them are recycling their water. I mean, if you just think about the number of cars that are going through every day, their water bill would be huge. And so because of that, most of them are actually recycling their water. And they don't have any extra restrictions put on them in drought level 1.
And so this is important to note because I looked this up the other day because we had a question about it. Of all the water that's used in San Angelo, commercial businesses use about 13% of that. And so car washes would just be a very slim portion of that 13% because, as you said, they reuse and recycle their water.
Exactly.
And so what about golf courses?
Right, so golf courses also have watering restrictions except for their greens. So obviously they have invested a lot of money in their greens and it is a form of recreation. And so that portion has variances in the ordinance that they abide by.
So the greens can be watered more often,
Right.
but the fairways and the tee boxes and everything else have to be watered no more than 1 inch once per week.
Exactly.
And you mentioned our parks, so our parks also follow the same restrictions. Lance, you mentioned about the Hickory a little bit ago and about how we haven't put the entirety of the Ford Ranch on the market because we're still developing that. So what's being done in order to maximize the Hickory's potential as far as the city of San Angelo is concerned?
We actually have a second phase or a continuation of the development of it. We're not really calling it a second phase. It's a continuation of that development, which is going to be evaluated right now by an engineering firm. And they are looking at how the first portions and the first wells are performing. They're looking at any kind of concerns that we've had as far as the transmission and the production rates. And then they're going to be applying remedies to those existing wells as well as the future wells that we're looking at putting in to develop so that we can actually develop that whole field to its maximum capacity.
And that would include the ability to treat more water from the Hickory as well.
Yes. When we put in the first phase of the Hickory well field at the water plant, we actually built that building to accommodate the future expansion. And so the facility is there, it's just it hasn't been outfitted with the equipment, and that is a part of what's being evaluated as well.
So right now we have the capacity to pump and treat 8 million gallons per day, but we're looking to increase that capacity to 12 million gallons.
That's
is that correct?
yes.
And that would be the maximum amount under the court order that we would be allowed to use from the Hickory once we realize our full water rights there.
Yes, that's correct.
So what about other water supplies? What's being done as far as looking at and developing other water supplies beyond our reservoirs in the Hickory?
We're actually looking at a multitude of different possibilities. As you know, the whole area that we're in, being semi-arid, there's not a whole lot of water supplies. Most easy and inexpensive water supplies have been developed. And so we are actually looking at potentially indirect reuses. We're looking at other sources. We have contacted other suppliers as well to see about it if they had capacity to provide for us. We also have even communicated with some other sister cities in the area that might be able to be a supply for an emergency time period if we needed to. Or even if they were in a situation that had an emergency need, we could also supply to them as well.
There's been a lot of talk in the past about reuse of water, and you mentioned indirect reuse. So explain exactly what indirect reuse is.
There's a few different types of reuse. A direct reuse literally means that you filter the water, you clean the water, and then you turn around and you put it back in, you treat it directly, right back into the system. An indirect use is really what goes on in nature. Most everyone in nature They utilize the water, they treat the water, produce the water. It gets used, it gets flushed, it gets cleaned to a certain level, it goes back into the ecosystem, and then you pick it up back down at a lake or a stream, which is what we're doing now. Indirect use is you just basically control the point that it is being discharged, and you control the point that it's being picked back up at.
You know, one of the interesting things when we were having those discussions back a couple of years ago that I learned that I didn't realize, or probably should have in grade school, is that all water is recycled. There's no more water now than there ever has been on the face of the earth.
That's correct.
So Paulina, if people want more information, how can they go about getting that?
Yeah, so if they need a reminder of our watering restrictions, no watering between noon and 6 p.m., watering only once every 7 days and no more than 1 inch, they can visit the water page on the city's website. They will be able to report a violation there and also fill out a new landscape form, which gives them variances so that they can help their yard develop those deep roots when they're just starting off.
And so again, if people want more information, they can go to our website, costatx.us/water. So if you have questions, comments, concerns that perhaps we didn't address during this, you are welcome to post those under the comments. We will go back and we will try to answer as many of those as we can. We always try to do that. People wonder if we actually listen and we respond. And yes, we do. We try to be very diligent about that. And we want people to understand not just what's happening right now with their water supply, but why. That's very important. And again, if you'd like to learn more about what our Parks Department is doing in order to conserve water, tune in tomorrow at 11 o'clock on Thursday. We'll have Roger Havlock here. He is our Parks Senior Manager, so we hope to see you then.